Imagine being so powerful that your closest friends feel they have no choice but to kill you. Imagine changing the world so completely that 2,000 years later we still use your name as a title for rulers. Kaiser, Tsar, Caesar. Now imagine that on the day of your greatest triumph, when you're about to become the most powerful man in the known world, you walk into a room and get stabbed 23 times by people you trusted. That's not a movie. That's the true story of Julius Caesar. And by the end of this video, you'll understand how one man rose from almost nothing to reshape human history, and why that very success guaranteed his brutal end. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, we dive deep into history's most fascinating stories, the ones that read like fiction but are absolutely real. And Julius Caesar's story, it's got everything. Ambition, betrayal, romance, war, political genius, and a death so dramatic that Shakespeare couldn't have written it better. Actually, Shakespeare did write it, but we're going to tell you what really happened. Before we get into it, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now, because if you love stories about power, ambition, and how one person can change everything, you're in the right place. And trust me, what you're about to hear about Caesar will change how you think about leadership, risk, and the price of greatness. Let's start with something most people don't know. Julius Caesar wasn't born into ultimate power. He wasn't a king's son. He came from a patrician family, yes, which meant he was technically nobility in Rome. But his family, they were broke, politically irrelevant. The kind of noble family that had a fancy name but no actual influence. Think of it like being related to royalty but living in a tiny apartment and working a regular job. The name opens some doors, but it doesn't hand you the world. Caesar was born in 100 BC into a Rome that was tearing itself apart. This wasn't the stable empire you might imagine. This was a republic, and it was chaos. Two political factions were literally killing each other in the streets. Rich senators hiring gangs, ambitious generals marching armies into the city. The whole system was broken, and into this mess, young Caesar had to figure out how to survive, let alone succeed. Here's where Caesar's genius starts to show. Most young nobles would play it safe, keep their heads down, make the right friends. Not Caesar. At 16 years old, he did something insane. There was a brutal dictator named Sulla in power, and Sulla ordered Caesar to divorce his wife. It was a political move. Caesar's wife was connected to Sulla's enemies. Any smart person would have obeyed. Caesar refused. Let me repeat that. A 16-year-old kid refused a direct order from the most dangerous man in Rome. Sulla was furious. Caesar had to flee the city and hide in the countryside to avoid being killed. That story tells you everything about who Caesar was. Fearless, stubborn, willing to risk his life for his principles, or maybe just for his pride. But here's the thing, that boldness could have gotten him killed. Instead, it made people notice him. Even Sulla eventually gave in and let Caesar live, reportedly saying, "In this Caesar there are many Mariuses." Marius was Sulla's greatest enemy. Sulla saw the danger in Caesar from the beginning.
When Sulla died, Caesar came back to Rome and started his climb. And this is where we see the second part of his genius, politics. Caesar understood something that most politicians miss. In Rome, everything ran on two things, money and popularity with the common people. The Senate, full of rich old men, hated both of those things. They wanted to keep power for themselves. Caesar was about to use their own system against them. He spent money he didn't have, borrowed massively, threw games and festivals for the people, gave away grain, put on gladiator fights that left Rome talking for months. He was buying popularity, and it worked. The common people loved him. They saw him as their champion against the corrupt Senate. Meanwhile, the Senate was getting nervous. Who was this guy spending fortunes to win the mob's love? But popularity alone doesn't give you power in Rome. You need military success. You need to command armies and win wars. That's how you become untouchable. So Caesar maneuvered and schemed until he got himself appointed governor of Gaul. That's modern-day France and Belgium. At the time, it was partially conquered territory with hostile tribes everywhere. Most governors saw it as a dangerous post. Caesar saw it as an opportunity. What happened next is legendary: the Gallic Wars. For 9 years, Caesar conquered all of Gaul. We're talking about defeating massive tribal armies, crossing the Rhine River into Germania, even invading Britain, twice. He wrote about his campaigns in his book, The Gallic Wars, which still survives today. And here's the clever part: he wrote it in third person, like he was a historian, not the commander. Caesar did this, Caesar did that. It made him sound objective while building his legend. Brilliant propaganda. The numbers are staggering. Caesar's campaigns resulted in the deaths of over 1 million people. Another 1 million were enslaved. Entire tribes were wiped out or displaced. Modern historians debate whether this counts as genocide. It was brutal, even by ancient standards. But in Rome, Caesar was a hero. He was sending back treasure, expanding Roman territory, making Rome richer and more powerful. The people loved him even more. His soldiers worshipped him, and the Senate, they were terrified. Because here's what they understood: Caesar now commanded a massive, loyal, battle-hardened army. He was popular with the people, he was rich from plunder, and he was still outside Rome, technically just a governor. But everyone knew he wanted more. The Senate, led by traditionalists like Cato, decided they had to stop him. They ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. If he did that, they could prosecute him for illegal acts during his governorship. Caesar would be ruined, possibly executed. Caesar was faced with an impossible choice: obey and be destroyed, or defy the Senate and start a civil war. Think about that for a second. This is one of the most important decisions in human history. What Caesar did next changed everything. In 49 BC, Caesar and his 13th legion reached the Rubicon River. This was the boundary. Roman law said no general could bring an army across the Rubicon into Italy. To do so was treason, punishable by death. Caesar stood at that river with his army behind him. If he crossed, there was no going back. Rome would be at war with itself. And he crossed. According to the historian Suetonius, Caesar said, "The die is cast," meaning the decision is made. Whatever happens, happens. That phrase, crossing the Rubicon, is still used today to mean passing a point of no return. That's how significant that moment was. What followed was civil war, but not the kind you might expect. Caesar moved so fast that he caught everyone off guard. His army swept through Italy. Pompey, the Senate's champion and Rome's other great general, fled. Caesar chased him to Greece, to Egypt, all over the Mediterranean. Battle after battle, Caesar won. Pompey was killed in Egypt, betrayed by people trying to win Caesar's favor. Within a few years, Caesar had defeated all his enemies. He returned to Rome not as a governor, not as a consul, but as the undisputed master of the Roman world. The Senate, terrified and defeated, gave him title after title. Dictator, not as an insult, but as an official position. Dictator for 10 years, then dictator for life. They put his face on coins. They named the month of July after him, Julius, July. Think about that. 2,000 years later, every July, we're saying his name. But here's where Caesar made his fatal mistake. He had all the power, but he didn't want to look like a king. Romans hated kings. The Republic had been founded on the overthrow of the last king 500 years earlier. So Caesar played a dangerous game. He held all the power of a king, but refused the title. He wore a purple toga, the color of royalty. He sat on a golden chair, but when his friend Mark Antony offered him a crown at a public festival, Caesar refused it 3 times. The crowd cheered each time he refused, but everyone could see through the theater. Caesar was a king in everything but name. And this drove some senators insane. Men like Brutus and Cassius, even some who had been Caesar's friends, decided that Caesar had to die. They convinced themselves they were saving the Republic. They called themselves the Liberators. They planned to kill Caesar in the Senate on the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BC.
Caesar had been warned. A fortune-teller told him to beware the Ides of March. His wife had nightmares about his death. Friends urged him not to go to the Senate that day. But Caesar went anyway. Maybe he thought he was invincible. Maybe he was tired of living in fear. Maybe he just couldn't imagine that his friends would betray him. The Senate met in the theater of Pompey. As Caesar entered, the conspirators surrounded him under the pretense of presenting a petition. Then one of them grabbed his toga, the signal. Suddenly, daggers everywhere. Caesar fought back at first, but there were too many, 23 stab wounds. The ancient sources say he saw Brutus among the attackers and said, "Et tu, Brute? You too, Brutus?" We don't know if he actually said that. Shakespeare popularized the line, but the sentiment was real. The betrayal by someone he trusted, maybe even loved like a son, that was the deepest wound. Caesar collapsed at the base of a statue of Pompey, his old enemy. The conspirators fled, covered in blood, shouting that they had saved the Republic. They expected to be hailed as heroes. Instead, Rome erupted in chaos. The people were furious. Caesar had been their champion. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal friend, gave a masterful speech at Caesar's funeral, turning the crowd into a mob. The assassins had to flee for their lives. And here is the ultimate irony. The conspirators killed Caesar to save the Republic, but killing Caesar destroyed the Republic forever. Caesar's death triggered another massive civil war. His adopted heir, a teenager named Octavian, later known as Augustus, would eventually win that war, and Octavian would become what Caesar never officially became, Rome's first emperor. The Republic was dead. The empire had begun, all because they killed the one man holding everything together. So, what's the lesson here? How did Caesar rise so high and fall so hard? It's simple and complicated at the same time. Caesar rose because he understood power. He understood that popularity, military success, and ruthlessness could take you to the top. He was brilliant, fearless, and willing to break every rule to win. But he fell because he didn't understand, or didn't care, that there's a limit to how much power people will tolerate in one person. Even if you refuse the crown, if you hold the power of a king, someone will try to take you down. Caesar's story is a warning about ambition without limits, about power without checks, about the danger of believing you're invincible. But it's also a story of greatness. Caesar literally changed the world, the calendar we use, the word emperor, the idea of a charismatic leader rising to power through popular support. All of that traces back to him. He was killed over 2,000 years ago, and we're still talking about him, still learning from him, still fascinated by him. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Hit that like button if this story grabbed you. And here's what I want you to do. Comment below and tell me, if you were Caesar standing at the Rubicon, would you cross? Would you risk everything, start a civil war and change history? Or would you turn back and accept defeat? I genuinely want to know what you think. Drop your answer in the comments. And if you loved this deep dive into history, subscribe and turn on notifications because I've got more epic stories on my channel. Alexander the Great, Cleopatra, etc. The rise and fall of empires, the people who shaped our world. This is just the beginning. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next one.